Okay. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Adoption Happy Hour presented by NAAP, the National Association of Adoptees and Parents. Our mission is to unify the adoption community and amplify diverse voices through dialogue, education, connection, and healing. I'm Patricia Knight Meyer, and I have the privilege of being your Third Friday Happy Hour host. And I'm joined tonight by NAAP board member Beth Sturry and Lori Kinsley, right? I think I saw Lori here. We're delighted to welcome attendees from across the country and around the world. Whether you've been part of this community for years or you're just joining for the very first time, we're grateful that you're here. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, which folks have already been doing. And also to remember, if you're not following us on Facebook or YouTube or any of other social channels, please do. Now, during the meeting, we're going to remain on mute. Please raise your hand on screen or the virtual hand to be recognized. You may post your questions or comments in chat. If you are experiencing a serious mental health event or suicidal thoughts, please contact a licensed professional or the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline by dialing 988. As you know, this is a public meeting with no guarantee that information or identity is confidential, and portions of this event are recorded and may be shared on our private happy hour group on Facebook and on the YouTube channel, which is not private. Beth, I think you have some announcements for us now.
I do. Let's see. Each time we're together, we want to remind you of all the programming that NAAP has. And I did see some names I have never seen before today, so we may have some first-time attendees. Happy Hour comes to us each first and third Friday night. Patricia hosts one generally, and Greg Gentry hosts the other one. We have a wide variety of guests, and we have a really good time meeting with the adoption community during Adoption Happy Hour. We have 3 other programs. We have Birth Parents, First Families, Birth Parents Journeying Together, and that is facilitated by Amy Seek. They meet the second Thursday of the month, and that will be coming up on August 13th. We have Putting Yourself Together After Reunion with Dr. Joyce. That support group takes place on the second or the third Tuesday each month, depending on how Dr. Joyce can fit that into her schedule. In August, it will be August 18th. And I consider her to be an expert on reunion. She does a fabulous job of reunion and helping us all to navigate that, which we're going to talk about tonight is a challenging thing to navigate for many of us. And then we close out each month with Dr. Liz's program, Migrating Toward Wholeness, Rewriting Adoption Narratives in the Constellation. That will be August 27th, and then we start over again each month. You can see that we have something nearly every week for people to get together with the adoption community. And then I do have something else to share, something that we are super excited about. And it's not going to start on the first one probably here. Okay. Hopefully you have seen some social media announcements, but NAAP is back with our own National Adoption Conference. We have not had a big conference like this since 2021, and we are so excited. Our theme is Rooted, Reaching, and Rising. It will be April 22nd to the 24th, 2027. We will be in Indianapolis. Okay, we're going to talk about the past. That's the rooted in truth. We're going to talk about the present, how we are reaching and growing in community. And we are going to talk about the future, how we are rising together for change. We are accepting proposals. They are due September 8th. We have 10 already. We only put out the call a week ago or so, and we already have 10 proposals have come in. I will drop the proposal link form in the chat in just a little while. We will be at the Crown Plaza, Indianapolis Airport Hotel. You can see some of the hotel amenities there. We are just calling everybody to be together for something big, this national gathering. Adoptees, birth parents, adoptive parents, family members, professionals, allies, everybody. We want to come together. This is the facility. We are only minutes from downtown Indianapolis, but better yet, we are close to the airport and they have a 24-hour-a-day airport shuttle. And we're excited about that because that always makes it the easiest to get where you're going. The facility is beautiful. We're really excited about being there, and they are excited about having us. So at this point, what we need you to do is put these dates on your calendar, April 22nd to the 24th, and help us spread the word. Tell your friends, your other communities that you meet with. We will be opening registration in November. You will be able to book your room. You will be able to register for the conference. So please, please mark your calendars, send in those proposals, and help us spread the word because we are very, very excited. And that is it for me, Patricia. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. I am so excited about that conference myself. It's going to be awesome. So I'm also very, very excited to welcome Elizabeth Barbour to talk with us tonight about reunions do's and don'ts. Elizabeth, this M.Ed stands for Masters of Education. Is that correct?
It is.
Okay. Elizabeth is an adoptee and adoptive mom with 27 years of reunion experience. In 1999, she found her birth mom, birth dad, and 11 brothers and sisters. An adoption reunion coach, speaker, and author of 2 books, she's currently writing her third about building healthy relationships in adoption reunions. Elizabeth helps people find grace and grounding amidst the grief and complexity of the reunion process through self-care, storytelling, and ritual. She lives in Asheville, North Carolina, and you can learn more about her at elizabethbarbour.com. And Elizabeth, I know a little bit about your story, but I'm very excited to hear you share it with everyone. And also, what this didn't mention is that in the work that you're doing to build this book, to write this book, you've done a lot of research. You've interviewed dozens. You can tell us exactly how many adoptees and first parents about all of this. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your personal story, but also all this research that you've been doing about and what you found through it about the do's and don'ts of reunion. So we'll hand it off to you now.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Should I go ahead and put up the PowerPoint, you think?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, maybe we'll start with that. Okay, share. Okay, can you all see it? Can you see that?
Yeah, I can. Let's
Okay,
ask everybody else.
great. Okay, good. So now it means I can't see the chat. So if anybody has questions in the chat, let me know, Patricia, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to start by saying thank you. Thank you so much for having me back. I think I spoke with you all, it's maybe been a year ago now, and so much has happened. Back then, I was just getting going on the book. Now I think I've interviewed 65 people, 66 maybe. And I've learned so much over the past year being back in the community. So today, I just want to go over a couple things real quick. This session is for you today. Who are an adoption constellation member, if you're living in reunion, if you're thinking about reunion, if you're a professional, or you just even know somebody who's in reunion and you're wanting to offer support. This work also applies for folks who are NPEs or their donor conceived people as well who are living in reunion. The language I've been using lately is like genetically disconnected people, because it's like we need our community needs like one phrase to describe all these folks who've been disconnected from family and are now back together. So wow. Oh, and I guess I should point out to you, so those 2 women, that's my raising mom on the right in that photo. Her name was Joan, and she passed away. It'll be 10 years ago in September. And then on the left is my first or birth mom. Her name was Kathy, and she passed away 3 years ago, which was not on the bingo card because she was very young and it was very unexpected when she died. So why do I care about this topic about reunion? So briefly, my story is an adoptee. So, I'm a baby scoop era adoptee, born in 1970, raised by my mom and dad in Connecticut as an only child. Never had any interest in looking for my birth family until my dad died when I was 24. And I married my high school sweetheart when I was 25, no longer married to him anymore. And I woke up when I was 26 and said, "Oh, I have to look for my birth family." And it like literally was just like this awakening. It was like, "Oh, okay, I have to do this." And of course, that was back in the days before the internet. I had a 3.5 year search, finally found my birth mom when I hired a private investigator. Um, and what was fascinating about the whole experience was this woman called me and said, "I found your mom." And it was like 48 hours after I had called her. And I was like, "Wait, what? Wait, I haven't even like sent you a check or anything." Which don't even get me started on that, right? Like I had to pay money to a PI to find my mother. So, but that was a long time ago. So I called my first mom, Kathy, when I got her number, which was just a few days later. And the first phone call went something like, "I've hoped and prayed this day would come." So I'm really one of the lucky ones. And I know that. I so know that. As the reunion evolved, I asked her, "Well, you're married. Does your husband know about me?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Do you have kids?" "Yeah, I have three." I was like, "Awesome. I have siblings. This is so cool." And I said, "Well, do they know about me?" She said, "No, not yet, but I'll tell them tonight." So she did. So 2 weeks later, I drove from North Carolina. I was actually living in Winston-Salem at the time, drove from North Carolina to Florida to meet her. She showed me her high school yearbook. She showed me my birth dad, and she's like, "There he is." I'm like, "Oh, he's really cute." Now I understand why I'm here. And she said, "Well, when you're ready, I know how to get in touch with him because he works for my cousin." And so the next day I said, "Yeah, I'm ready for you to call him." And she's like, "Well, you just met me. What? That's crazy." And I said, "If we're going to do this, like, let's do this." So she called him, and it took him about 2 weeks to call me. And when he finally did, the very early conversation was, "Well, I don't know what you want and what do you need, and blah, blah, blah." And I said, "I don't know. Let's take it one day at a time." And, "So you married?" "Yes." "Does she know about me?" "Yes." "Do you have any kids?" "Only 8." And I was like, "Wait, only 8?" So I very quickly went from being an only child to being the eldest of 12. So it has been a wild ride. It's been 27 years. April was 27 years. And I won't tell as much of this story, but I also became an adoptive mom. After a long fertility journey, as many of us who become adoptive parents after 5.5 years, my husband and I decided to adopt. And it was an open adoption initially. And right, our daughter's birth mom closed the adoption or closed the open adoption. About 2 years in, she just kind of disappeared from our lives, which was really painful for me because that was always my dream. Like if I'm going to parent an adopted child, I want to be in relationship with her mother and want her to be a part of our family and be a part of our lives. And that just hasn't been our experience. However, we did DNA testing when our daughter was 9, so that would be 6 years ago now, and discovered that her birth dad was someone different than we thought it had been, and he didn't know he had parented a child. So eventually, after a few months went by, his mother reached out to me and said, "Can you help me understand how your daughter is part of our family tree?" And we began our reunion. And it's been really wonderful and great. It's been 6 going on 7 years now, and we see him a couple times a year, and he and his new wife have a baby, and so Riley has a little half brother, and it's just been really positive and lovely. And because of my own experience as an adoptee and in a very massive reunion with dozens and dozens of people, I've been able to guide us through her family, and I think I'm doing a decent job of it. At least I certainly, so I'm trying to. And, we have positive relationships all the way around. So I know that's not everybody's experience, and I know that I'm really fortunate. So that's why when I decided to start working on this book, and interestingly, I started to write the Living in Reunion book right after my mother died, my first mother. So she passed away 3 years ago, and then I was in a car accident about 4 weeks after she died, and it nearly took me out. I was out of work for about 4 months, and I had a really bad concussion, and so I couldn't be on screens. I was spending a lot of time walking in the woods and just resting and recovering. And it was this very almost kind of spiritual experience of like, okay, what am I supposed to be doing now? And I kind of felt like, the directive from the divine was, you need to be doing this adoption work, Elizabeth. You started it years ago and you put it aside. So I had originally written my outline for this Living in Reunion book back in 2006, y'all. 2006. And so I finally pulled it out. And I've been working on it diligently for 2 years now. And as Patricia knows, because she's getting ready to launch her book in November, it takes years to do a really good job of writing a book. And so I am knee deep in the process, and we'll talk more about it as we get into some of this. Professionally, I've been a life and business coach for 25 years. And all throughout the years, I've always had people touched by adoption in my practice, whether it's been adoptive parents, first or birth parents, and adoptees. They just find their way to me. And a lot of times it's because if I'm out speaking and I'm in the community and I'll mention something about my adoption story, then people come up to me afterwards and they're like, oh, I'm connected this way. Um, and then just in the last few years, I've been real involved speaking at, several different conferences and sessions. And for those of you who know Leslie McKinnon here in the adoption community, she happens to live here in Asheville. And when I moved back to town and connected with her, she's like my new best BFF. We've had a lot of fun together. And I'll tell you more about it later, but we are planning an adoption reunion retreat for November. And so would love to invite some of you to join us. It's called The Long Game, and we'll talk about it later. Um, so that's just me. So let's talk a little bit more. Like, why does reunion need grace? And I want to talk about the grace method. And just so you know, with this photo here, that's our daughter Riley and her birth dad, the first weekend we met. And I just cry when I think about it, y'all, because watching my kiddo have that genetic mirroring when she was only 9, she was 9 when we met him, she's growing up with that, which is something I didn't have. I didn't meet my birth family till I was 29. I'm sorry, I've told this story so many times and I still get emotional thinking about it. So every time I see her with him, I'm just so happy. I'm so happy that she gets this experience and that she's built this really solid relationship. In fact, she was just telling me the other day, she's like, oh, yeah, we're already talking when I'm 18, Mom. We're going to go to Japan together, the two of them. And I'm like, that's awesome. Like, I love it. So, so why does reunion need grace, right? I mean, it's so complex for those of you who've experienced it. It is joy and grief and hope and fear and confusion and overwhelm and like insane excitement and sleepless nights and, reading all the things and looking at the pictures and obsessing about it. And then there's times when it's really hard. Why haven't they called me? Why haven't I heard from anybody? Ooh, they said this thing and it hurt my feelings, and they didn't know it hurt my feelings. And I don't know how to say anything because I'm really afraid, because what if that causes a rift, and what if they're mad at me and then they go away? Right? Like, this is all the stuff we deal with. It is so complex. We are building relationships with people who are family, but they are strangers. So the book that just came out, was it a BK's book about relative strangers? I love that term because that's what we are. We are relatives and we are strangers, and both things can be true. And I think that's what's so important about reunion. And when we get into conversation later, and you guys have questions, I think that's one of the most important things that I teach, is that we have to be able to hold the both and. There is very little black and white in this. There is so much gray and there's so much nuance. And we have to give other people grace and we have to give ourselves grace. So, what is the GRACE method? So, it's the framework for the book that I'm writing, and when it comes out, you all will get it in way more detail. But the GRACE method is basically a reminder for you about how you want to approach these relationships. So, it stands for Genesis, Reconnection, Authenticity, Communication, and Evolution. I'm just quickly going to go through this because I really want to. Patricia and I are going to have a little bit of dialogue about some stuff, but Genesis in the beginning. So I just want to show you this photo here. Those are all my brothers and sisters. Look at them, aren't they pretty? That was a long time ago. That was when I got married in 2004. It was the one and only time in my life that all 12 of us were together. And it was one of the most magical parts of that day. And I love this photo so much because it represents this was a beginning for all of us. And we continue to begin again. Now I think I have, I don't know, 20 nieces and nephews, 21 nieces and nephews, because, they're all married now and they've got kids. And so we have new beginnings each time there's a new member of the family and each time we have a new visit. After my birth mom died, uh, my three siblings, so if you look at that photo, the three closest to me, Chaz, Dina, and Bradley, we all went on a vacation together. So the four of us and our partners and our children, it was the first time that had ever happened. And it was one of the best vacations of my life. But that was because, and we'll talk about this later too, like the evolution of the relationship. We wouldn't have done that at the beginning, but as decades have gone by, we've shifted in our relationships with each other. So, Genesis is this idea that, we want to set expectations up front. We want to talk about our vision and, what are our hopes and our fears and our dreams. And we can always redo that. We can always press the reset button at any time. You can always begin again. So I think that's a really important thing to remember about reunion. Reconnection. This is around, I think, about healing the separation. And so it's as much about other people as it is about you with yourself. How are you feeling about your experience, whether you're an adopted person, whether you're a first parent, whether you're an adoptive parent, or if you're a constellation member and you're, like another support person, maybe you're a spouse, maybe you're a sibling, maybe you're a grandparent, maybe you're a cousin. And, how has a reunion relationship impacted your identity, your sense of self, how things are showing up. Like I know for my siblings, they all had to, especially my two oldest brothers, on my birth dad's side and on my birth mom's side, had to realize they weren't the eldest kid anymore. It was me. Now, it wasn't that big of a deal, I don't think. However, it was certainly a like, wow, okay, things have shifted, sort of shifted in the natural order of things. So I think these conversations are so important, and also just reconnecting with your spiritual life. What is your anchor? Is it going to church or temple on a regular basis? Is it walking in the woods and hugging trees, which is my preferred? Is it meditation to sort of ground yourself? So I think all of these pieces, sort of self, others, and spirit, is an important part of this reconnection process. Because when you're in relationship with others, you've got to make sure you're coming from a clear and grounded center and place. Um, Authenticity, this is about getting real. I think, as we all know in this community, right, one of the biggest challenges we face is that adoption is a system built on secrecy and lies. And so when we get into reunion and when we build relationships, or when we're thinking about getting into reunion and building relationships, we want to make sure that we say no more to the secrecy and the lies. And this is where the truth is so important. And it's not just the truth about what happened, but it's the truth about how do I feel in this moment and how am I experiencing this right now? And I was having an exchange with a friend the other day who was saying, I'm in relationship with my birth son, and there's some things that aren't feeling really, really good. And my response was, so have you talked about it? And have you shared honestly what's on your heart? And this is where the vulnerability comes in, right? Where we have to take the risk to say, this relationship is really important to me, and this relationship matters to me, and something's not feeling right about it. And I'd like to share that with you, and I'd like to ask you to listen. And then I want to invite you to do the same with me, right? So the more we can be intentional in these conversations, I think the better off everybody is. Um, Communication, this is like basic relationship stuff, you guys, but it's like, composing what you're going to say, be clear about what your request is, be consistent about how you're showing up, be considerate and thoughtful and compassionate when you're saying what you need to say, and be complete. I think that's one of the things that always cracks me up when people are like, oh, well, I want to get together with my family member, let's say, the person you've reunited with, and maybe you haven't seen him in a year, and they go, oh, well, I just want to get together. But I don't know how that's going to happen. You've got to be specific. Say, I'm going to be in your area on this date. I'd like to spend 2 days with you, please. I'll stay in a hotel because that feels better. Or, could I stay at your house? Do you have a guest room that I could stay in? And here's what I'd like to do during our time together. Like, the more specific we can be in our requests, I think the better off for everybody. And that goes for the basics like texting and phone calls and Zoom meetings. It's like, hey, how often do we want to do this? Do we want to be in touch every day, every week, every month, a couple times a year? Like, what feels good to you? What feels good to me? And, we have to find our way through that. And where you are in the beginning is very different than where you're going to be 5 years, 10 years, 30 years down the road. So, all of that is real important. And then the last, the E in grace is the evolution, just knowing that this relationship is going to change over time. So, this photo here, I just want to point out. So on the far right is my brother Nathan. Then I'm to the next in the right in the pink. My birth dad, that's Roger in the middle. That's his wife Paula and my sister Sarah. And I want to point out something about Paula here. I've talked about her a lot. She raised 8 children with Roger. And when I came onto the scene, we were talking in the very first days of our visit together, our first visit together. And I just said, Paula, I'm so grateful to you for inviting me into the fold. And she said, Elizabeth, any child of Roger's is a child of mine. And that changed everything. And so, I know years ago in this community, we used to just talk about the adoption triad. And I'm so glad that we now talk about the adoption constellation because Paula is one of the key constellation members for me to help me feel welcome and to feel like I belong. And every person, whether it's a spouse or a grandparent or a cousin or a sibling, like everybody has their role to play. And the more that those people are educated and understand how important it is for us to invite everybody into the fold, it changes everything. And there's an evolution of that over time, right? Like sometimes maybe kids are too young, siblings might be too young. My youngest sibling was 3 when I found them. I was 29. And just a few months ago, I had to attend a funeral of my uncle. I stayed with my youngest sister, who is now married and has 2 kiddos. And in fact, her son is almost 3, so he was 2. So he's almost the age I was when I met her. And so, like, that relationship of ours has evolved over time. In the beginning, she was a 3-year-old kid. I was old enough to be her mom. And now we are parenting together. So it's just really neat to see how time and life changes and cycles and everything change. So I'm gonna move here to the do's and don'ts, and then I'm wondering, Patricia, if maybe we want to kind of you and I talk a little bit about
Yeah,
this
I have
together.
so many things I want to say to so many things that you said.
Okay, okay, let's go for it.
Yeah, but please do start here and then we'll dive into it a little more.
And do you want me to take, okay, I'll go over this real quick and then we'll stop the share and maybe just have you
Yeah,
and I
I
talk
think
for
that's
just
a
a
good
minute.
idea.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
So some of the do's and don'ts, and these are some of the highlights from the research that I've done with all these folks that I've interviewed for my book. Um, the 3 don'ts that have come out the most: don't hurry, don't assume, and don't push. And, so the don't hurry, and this is also one that I hear from Leslie McKinnon a lot, is like, do not hurry, take your time, be patient with the process. Because I think when we start our search, and especially if we are the ones searching, it's really easy to want to be like, oh my gosh, that's so great, and I found them, and I want to call them right away, and whatever. And we really need to stop and get settled and take our time and really think through, what do I want to say? How do I want to say it? What's my goal here? What am I looking for? Um, but that's not only applicable to the first contact. It's also applicable to planning a trip together or planning holidays together. I think a lot of times we try and rush through things and push and make things happen. But it's so important to kind of step back and go, okay, what's the bigger vision here? What do we want to create? What's the conversation we want to have? How do we want to feel after this time is over? So often when we're in reunion, we're not the same geographically. We're separated sometimes by an hour or two. Sometimes it's, 1,000 miles. Sometimes it's for another country. I have a client right now. Her birth daughter is in Germany, and she's here in the United States, and they've never met in person. So, that kind of stuff, you have to look at not hurrying and just take your time. Don't assume. This is, I think, one of the biggest ones. Like, please don't make assumptions. And I don't know if y'all heard your parents say this, but my dad, my adoptive dad, always used to say, Elizabeth, don't assume. It makes an ass out of you and me. But it's so true, because we make these assumptions about how someone is showing up, or somebody says something and you go, oh, that was about me. And it may have nothing to do with you. It may have to do with the fact that they had a really bad day, or they were thinking about something else, and they just, were being human. So don't make assumptions about things. Clarify, clarify, clarify. Ask questions. Ask for, can you help me understand that? Or you said that thing, and here's what I heard, but is that really what you meant? And can we talk through that a little bit? And then just don't push. I think a lot of times we try, especially in the early days of reunion, it's like, oh, I want to build this relationship, get to know this person, I want to know everything about them. But depending on where you are in your life, and depending on where your person is in their life, I don't know what's going on. Maybe they're caring for elder parents. Maybe they're retiring. Maybe they're raising kids. They got a baby at home. Maybe they've got teenagers and they're feeling, maxed out. I've got a teenager at home right now. I get that. Um, so it's really about understanding where people are, and checking in and saying, well, this is the pace I'd like to go at. This is what I'm observing is the pace that you want to go at. How can we find something that feels good for both of us? So this is where the communication is just so key. Um, and the three biggest do's in the folks that I interviewed: get support, educate yourself, and be open and curious. Everybody talked about just the importance of having support, whether it's having, like a reunion coach, somebody like me, working with a therapist if a lot of traumatic stuff comes up. Being a member of one of the support groups. NAAP has so many, AKA, Cub. I know Leslie and I are now running a local group here in Asheville. We've got an Asheville Adoption Connection group that we're running. So find support. Educating yourself is so key. So many of us enter reunion and even go through reunion. I mean, I've met a lot of people who've been in reunion 10, 20 years, and they're like, oh, I haven't read that book. Oh, I've never heard of that blog. Oh, I've never watched that documentary. And that's okay. But what I will say is that the more you educate yourself, the more you're able to show up in your reunion and in your relationship, as being a leader, and as saying, hey, I saw this thing. You want to talk about it? Like, I really wish my birth mom had lived long enough for me to take her to a Cub meeting. I just re-engaged with Cub last year for the first time, and really wish I had done it while she was still living, because that would have been life changing for her.
Yeah.
And I think she would have gone with me. And then the last thing is just be open and curious. I think it kind of goes along with assuming, right? Like, don't assume things. Ask open-ended questions, and just be curious about people, about themselves, about their lives and their stories, but also, how they're showing up. And like, if someone shows up and they're like a little, it's like, well, tell me more about that. Like, what's going on for you? What are the fears that are coming up? What are the anxiety? And, sometimes you can do that one-on-one, and sometimes you need a buffer. I know one of the men that I interviewed for my book, he was an adult adoptee, found his birth dad, but said that it was his birth dad's wife who was really one of the key, sort of like I was telling you all about Paula. She was the key communicator and sort of was the bridge to opening things up. So just be open and curious. So okay, I'm going to stop talking because Patricia, I know you've got questions. So let's get in. And also, I'm going to stop my share here for a minute.
That's great. Yes. Oh my gosh. I have questions, I have comments, I have thoughts.
Okay.
Well, you know this. I don't know that everybody on the call knows this, but I had my two reunions about 15 years ago, both. The first one with my first mother went horribly wrong, mainly because we did all the things you're not supposed to do, like you listed out right here. And then when about a year later, when I reunited with my birth father, I had done a lot of the things that you recommend doing, which is educating myself, finding community. I had a secret birth mother up my sleeve who is not my birth mother, but who was my go-to to get advice from. And all of that was, so incredibly helpful. And so my goal with him was don't make all those same mistakes, right? Uh,
Right.
and then a couple of other things that you mentioned that I just wanted to sort of reiterate um, is how important authenticity is and how being an adoptee and being a people pleaser, uh, I really hadn't found a way I hadn't learned yet how to have healthy personal boundaries. And I used to think that boundaries were selfish things to have. You have to say no, or, uh, that was a struggle for me. And so when I met my birth mother and I had things weren't going well, I was so fearful of displeasing her or rejecting or getting rejected by her,
Yes.
that I wouldn't voice when I had a different opinion or I had a different or I had a need or I felt like she was calling me too much. I mean, didn't terrified of having just terrified of having those conversations. And I think when I look back on it, that she probably felt some of that as well. Like she didn't want to say anything to me about how she was really feeling. And I do think the key to that, right, is studying, coming to things like this, first of all, understanding your own trauma and
Right.
reading books on healthy reunions, and learning from other people about what constitutes good guidelines for starting that reunion. And also, before you ever start searching, thinking about why you want this reunion to begin with. And those feelings can change as you meet these people, right? Like you might just think you want your biology, and then you might suddenly realize, oh, I want a lot more than this.
Right.
But also it's kind of scary because sometimes you don't know what you want, and even if you do, you don't know what the other person wants. And
Right.
so there's just it's such a I describe it as a land. It's like you're walking through a field of landmines. It's the most beautiful
Mhm.
place you've ever seen, but it's full of landmines. Uh,
Yes.
and so I guess some of my questions for you is
But wait, before you go
yeah,
on to that, can
yeah.
I comment on
Oh,
something?
sure, yeah.
I want to talk about the authenticity piece for a minute because I think that one is so critical. The first time we have some kind of conflict or confrontation with the person that we're in reunion with, and how terrifying that really is for everybody. Because I think that fear of, oh my gosh, if I really speak my truth, they're going to go away. And I'll remember the first time I did it was actually when my first mother, my birth mom, was talking about her grandchildren, and she counted the number of grandchildren she had, and she did not include my daughter or her step grandchildren. She only included her biological grandchildren. And I lost my shit. Not to her at home privately, with my husband. I was like, I can't believe blah 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 blah. And so I gave myself like a week. I talked to my therapist. I like wrote about it. And I finally got up the courage. I was like, I cannot sit on this. I have to talk to her. So I very calmly explained how it made me feel when she did that. And the way I think I really got through to her, I said, I just want to imagine that when I was growing up in my adoptive family, if my grandparents had crowned grandchildren and they hadn't included me, how would that make you feel? And she goes, oh my God, Elizabeth, that would be horrible. I would never want you to have felt that way. And I said, exactly. And she was like, I am so sorry. I never thought about it. You have taught me something, and thank you so much. And she said, thank you for not like losing your shit on me. And I said, well, I was pretty upset of her.
Wow.
And we were able, but it's that I could have swallowed that and never said anything, and I've always been resilient. And I was really proud of myself for being courageous, but I was terrified. I was so afraid she was going to go away. So
Yeah, yeah.
just had to share that.
I I I can relate to that. I had a situation where my daughter had come to visit my birth mother and her mother and my brother, and we did a family picture together. We did multiple pictures. And then we came back for this party, and my birth mother had put a picture of myself and she and myself and my brother on the cake, but not a picture of my daughter on the cake. And that really disturbed me, right? Um, and so but I didn't voice that. I just tucked it inside and, added it to my laundry list of things in my head that I was frustrated and upset with. Um, but yeah, thank you for following up on the authenticity part, because it is so important that, we show up as our true selves no matter, but the way that you confronted it was so nice, because you were able to get her to start thinking about how your adoptive family would have treated you. And that gave her, I guess, a way that didn't feel so accusatory, in the translation. I also wanted to talk a little bit about evolution of the relationships, because you talked about how
Mm-hmm.
things change over time and how important it is to go slow and to have patience. And I tell people that are initially struggling in reunion that sometimes it just takes some people, that the secret sauce is time, because over time trust is built. And if you just keep showing up consistently in the same way, people begin to realize that you're not there for inheritance, you're not, whatever. It took my brother about 5 years to warm up to me. And eventually, he realized, okay, so she's here for the long run. Um,
Yeah.
and then I also briefly wanted to mention, and maybe you can talk more about this, and that is, if you have done the work and but you're preparing for reunion, you're going to try to do this, and then you find your person, they haven't prepared at all.
Right.
That could be the case. And so, coming in prepared is good, but then you also kind of have to realize, well, they haven't had a chance. They're not as far along as you are necessarily on all of this. Um, and then that goes into when I found my birth father, I felt like, okay, I have to teach him all of
Right.
these rules, and I have to explain to him that there's all the family we have to worry about around us, whose feelings we have to take care of. And that can feel frustrating, because as an adoptee, I feel like I've been taking care of people's feelings my whole life, right? um, and so
Yes.
I'm sure that's a little bit of a struggle, as well.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I hear that a lot from fellow adoptees. It's like, God, we are so tired about being the ones having to educate everybody. And yet, I also think it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to level the playing field. And I remember when we first reunited with our daughter's birth dad, and he was just kind of like, "Whoa, what's happening here?" And I was able to say, take your time, and here's some books, and here's some podcasts, and here's some blogs. And if you want to talk about anything, just let me know. And I know that he really appreciated that. he said, thank you, because like you kind of know what you're doing here. I said, well, I'm fumbling a little bit, but I've got a little more experience in this than you do.
Hmm.
Yeah, but you're right. I mean, it is really frustrating. And yet, it really depends on who's the person who searches. It's not always the adopted person who does the searching. So I think the onus does tend to be on the person who is the searcher who has taken time
Yeah,
to do that research and then say, hey, I'd love for you to catch up with me. Would you like me to share some resources? Because not everybody's going to be open to that.
yeah.
But hopefully they will, you know.
My birth father had this idea in his head that the adoptee should always drive the reunion because everything else did not happen on our own terms. And so to
Right.
allow things to be on my terms, it went a long way with me that I hated that he said, I will never call you unless you call me because I don't ever want to hear you answer the phone when you're not in the mood to talk to me. But also, he just knew that that was giving me the reins and that I never had to feel put out or feel like he was calling me too often. Um, and I think that ultimately in reunion, however far it goes or deep it goes, it's sort of the lowest common denominator between the two people, right? It's like and if you don't get 100% of what you want, to some degree, you can be patient and hope it comes along. Or at some point, you just kind of have to grieve it and accept, like, this is where this person is at, and this is what they're willing to do or share for now.
Right.
And that was one of the key things I kept using when I started putting the brakes on with my birth mother. I kept telling her, I'm not prepared to be this close for now. Um, what do you think about that? Is that how do you manage when expectations for reunion are so very different?
Well, I think it's just important to really talk about it. I think a lot of times we assume, right? And we sort of say, well, this is where I am and this is where they am, and that's just how it's going to be, instead of having the hard conversation, which is like, can we just talk about what I'm noticing in terms of our communication and how things are different? And you're doing this and I'm doing that. Maybe one person is texting all the time, or the other person is like, no, I'd really rather talk on the phone. Um, and to just talk about it and say, let's just take a look at our patterns and what we're doing and what feels good to you and why, and what feels good to me and why. I've talked to so many people, clients and friends and colleagues, and it's like a lot of times it's a stage of life thing. I mean, it's literally like when you're home and you've got three kids under the age of 10 and you've just reunited with your birth family, they are not your priority because you got three kids that are like, muddy hands and mom, I want a PB&J, and the other one, just had a mess in the potty. It's like,
Mhm.
I can't do that. And then conversely, say we meet one of our parents, maybe we meet a first or a birth parent, and maybe they're caring for their aging parents, or they're in the middle of retiring, or they're in this stage of life and they don't have the capacity. So, there's so many factors, and I think the important part is we've just got to talk about it.
Yeah,
And you've got to ask people to be willing. Say, I know this might be an uncomfortable conversation, but are you willing to engage in this with me?
yeah.
And if people aren't able to talk, then say, hey, could we like write about it? Could we email about it? I know some folks I've talked with, they say sometimes it's easier to talk through the hard stuff in writing as opposed
Mhm.
to doing it face to face. So,
Very good advice. Very good advice. Going back to your research, and you may have already touched on this in the PowerPoints, but I just wanted to ask again, like based on all the conversations that you had with folks, like what were the recurring themes of the lessons learned?
one of the biggest recurring themes, which I sort of presented as be open and curious, but it was like, don't have expectations. Like, don't go in with any preconceived notions because you just don't know what you're going to get. Are you going
Yeah.
to get a yes? Or are you going to get a no? Are you going to find out that let's say you're an adopted person, that your parents are deceased? Are you going to find out that they didn't even know about you? Or are you going to find out that maybe your parents got married and they went on and had a whole other family and they raised, multiple kids together? And you know, like, and then you don't know, are they gonna want to be in relationship with you? And maybe they say no right away, but then maybe 5 or 10 years down the road, they open the door again. You know, like there are so many scenarios. I think that's the one thing in this community I have found more than any other work I've done in my life is that everybody goes, yeah, my story is so unique. And it's true that every single story is so unique. I mean,
That's the truth.
every day I hear new iterations. Like Leslie and I had our support group locally the other night. We had two new people, and we were like, wait, what? Wait, what happened to you? And it's just like it's just so amazing.
And
So
I think that makes writing the manual pretty hard, right? Because in
it
every
does.
one is different. All these stories are absolutely different. And we
Yes.
come in, I learned quickly that reunion can sometimes add more. People come in thinking that reunion's going to answer all your questions, and all those questions about your life are going to be zipped up. And sometimes they lead to more and different questions. You also learn that some of the stories that you grew up believing were just that. They were just stories that were made up. And then you kind of have to come to terms with the new reality. And so it can I know for me, a reunion definitely improved my sense of self and strengthened my sense of identity, but it sort of had to disassemble at first. Everything I thought I knew about myself
Yes.
was wrong. And then I learned the true version and I was able to build a more honest version of that. Of course, meeting the people who created you adds to that. Um, did anybody that you interviewed talk about guilt for the reunion guilt that some adoptees have? Because we know that we are the few and far between that do find like both of our biological families. There's a lot of people who have found and then they've been rejected again or they've never found at all. Um, did anybody talk about that?
You mean the guilt about like finding and having it good? Is that what you mean? Or the
Yeah,
guilt
like
about
knowing that there's so many people, there's so many adoptees in the world and first parents that are waiting and hoping and
right.
don't have access to their information, that don't have
Yes.
reunions, that have tried a reunion and then they got, a
Yes.
no, a firm no. I have carried this feeling of like I want to share my story, but I don't want to look like I'm, being like
Yeah.
insensitive about the fact that this is a special thing and I'm so grateful. And there it is, that word, that adoptee,
There it
I'm
is,
grateful
right?
adoptee. But it's so weird that I feel that I have to be grateful in front of I don't want to be grateful to my community too. Yeah.
It's well, you and I have talked about this offline for sure. And I think it goes back to where I started at the beginning. This is one of those both and things because I have always personally felt it really important to share my reunion story because I want people to know what's possible. And I want to educate other people, especially who are not directly impacted by adoption. Not just like the happy, yay, look at my family, but look at the hard work it's taken us to get here and look at the trauma that started it and the grief and the loss that we've had to work through. So I try and talk about all of that. But I do think it's a both and. I think it's about being sensitive to the other folks in our community who maybe have a different story than we do and being as loving as we can and say, I'm really grateful for my experience and I'm really sorry that's not your experience. And that, right? Like that's life, right?
Yeah.
And
I
just
also,
being as kind and gentle about that
yeah.
as we can be for sure.
I also try to remind people, I've heard people say, oh, well, my reunion with my birth mother went horrible. So why would I ever want to try to do another one? And I'm like, I would have been one of those people, except that she found him for me and told him about me, and I was sort of forced into it. And then it was like the best thing that had ever happened to me. So I tell a lot of
Mm,
people who are like, well, I've heard so many bad stories, I would never want to do that. I'm like, but if you had a bad experience with one parent, that doesn't mean that it's going to be the same way with the other. And I think a lot of times it might have a lot to do with, how even in natural families, we tend to be more like one parent than the other. Like people will say, I
right.
am so much like my dad, or I am so much like my mom. And I think in my case, part of that ability to connect was just that I was so much like my dad, and I think that that can go into it as well. So I always try to encourage people, like, just because you had one bad experience doesn't mean it's going to be the same with the next one either.
Right.
Well,
That's such a great point.
now I'd like to wrap up this portion because I want you to talk about the retreat,
Okay.
and then we'll open it up for questions because we've got about 30 minutes left.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay. Thank you so much for letting me talk a little bit about the retreat. So, let me, there we go. There we are. So, when I got to know Leslie, and we've become friends over the past year, and she's been doing reunion work for, I don't know, 40 years, um, as a therapist, plus her own experience. And then, of course, I've been in reunion for 27 with my birth family, and then also 6 with my daughters. And so I just said, Leslie, I used to run a retreat business for women and professional women and whatever, and I said I really want to do an in-person retreat to have people come together to talk about reunion, because there are so many wonderful spaces in our adoption community, where we can go and connect with other people, but at least it's not my experience that there's a lot of places where we can go to just talk about reunion. And, Patricia, sort of to your point, sometimes people feel a little guilty about it or whatever. And so to be in a place where there are people, who have experienced reunion, just feels really good. It's like, oh, you understand my experience, even if it's completely different, but it's like, like, I see you, I see you. So we are hosting the long game. It is all about navigating the roller coaster, because you all know it is such a roller coaster if you've been through it, or even just even thinking about it, like even getting altering and thinking about searching and all of that. That's a roller coaster in and of itself. So we're here in Asheville, North Carolina. So, beautiful in the mountains. It's actually in Black Mountain, which is about 30 minutes east of Asheville. We've got a beautiful little retreat facility, hosts about 20 people. We'll probably cap it at that. And the plan will be Friday night, all day Saturday, and Sunday morning. But the plan is that Leslie and I are going to be using our decades of experience and wisdom, to guide people through, understanding the stages of reunion. We'll delve a lot deeper into the GRACE methodology, so sort of what I presented to you tonight, but we'll go way deep into it. We'll have sort of some role plays and interactive stuff. We'll be talking about, your self-care, how do you take care of yourself at all stages of reunion, the beginning, the messy middle, when people shut doors, when there's a pause, and then, how do you sustain it for 10, 20, 30 years and longer? So we're going to be talking about all those things, and we're really going to customize it based on who's coming to join us. So we're going to send out questionnaires to everybody who's coming. We're going to want to get to know a little bit more of your story. And then we will make sure, I mean, we have our topics in mind, but we're going to make sure we customize it to help people with their particular scenarios. And our ideal scenario would be for people who are in reunion to come together. So maybe an adopted person and their first parent. Maybe it could be an adoptive parent who is guiding their adult child through reunion with their biological family, and they're trying to understand and be the best possible support. It could be any triad member and a spouse, or a child, or I saw, sorry, I was trying not to be distracted by the chat, but I got a little distracted by the chat. And someone talked about how reunion has helped all the generations in the family. So maybe it's a grandparent who really has a big impact on how the relationship is going. So we'd love to have family members come and work on things together, but it's not necessary. Like, if you're the only one who wants to show up, that's great. So that's the URL to get it. It's 375 per person, or it's 650 if 2 members of a family come together. That's for the retreat, includes all the activities and then 3 meals. And then, there's local lodging. You can find an Airbnb. Well, we're going to have a group rate at a local hotel. I just want to show you just a couple more pictures of the property where we're going to be. That's Leslie here on the left. There's this little goddess. They were getting ready. It's a gorgeous place, you guys. And part of why we chose this particular place is that this work is so tender and so holy and so sensitive. we felt it was really important to be in a place that felt nurturing. Like it's not a classroom, it's 100-year-old log cabin. And so that home, that house, that space has held so much. And so the land is beautiful. It's right by the river. There's all these gardens. And so we're going to be having sessions and then say, go outside and go walk in the woods. Go for a mile hike and then come back and talk with us some more. So it's really going to be an interactive space where you're going to have, it's not like a lecture or anything. It's going to be very interactive. And there's going to be plenty of space for you to rest. And of course, if any of you have ever been to Asheville, you know that Asheville is amazing. And so we're sort of encouraging people come in a day early, leave a day late, and give yourself time to, spend in the area because it's really a magical healing place to be. So, and then just so you know, if you want support from me, whether it's to talk about the retreat or if you want to talk about some reunion coaching, doing a little bit of one-on-one work, check out my website, which by the way is not fully updated. I'm in transition because all my work now is adoption related. I've made, but my website doesn't totally reflect it yet. But go to elizabethbarbour.com/adoption. I also write on Substack, so you can check that out. Um, and then find me on the socials. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that. Email me anytime. I'm a question. So, okay, so I'm gonna stop.
Wow. Thank you so much. This is fantastic. And if I wasn't going to be in the middle of a book launch, I would be at that retreat with you. It's killing me. It's happening on the same weekend.
I'm so sorry. We should have planned that better, but I'm so excited for your book
Yeah,
launch too. It's gonna be
thank you.
amazing.
But no, I mean, I will be there. If you do it another year or another time in another period of the year, please sign me up. I would love to attend
If
that.
if the first one goes well, which I think it probably
Oh,
will, we'll
I'm
probably do another one
sure.
next
I'm sure it will.
year. Yeah.
Um, I also noticed that, I guess now might also be a good time to plug CUB, Concerned United Birth Parents, is having their conference in early October this year. I think you are going to be there. I know Leslie will be there. It is their 50th anniversary. And so, like I said, connecting with first mothers has been the key to my reunion sanity. And there's so much love there that I encourage anyone to go and be held in this space by these fantastic people. Also, what was I going to say? Oh, yes, I noticed in the chat that people talked about the which we did not cover, and that is how adoptive families respond to our reunions and how, for me, I lost adoptive family members. I've read in the chat that other people have as well, and that can be a really tough part of it. So maybe we'll dive into that with some of the questions that people have, but I just wanted to
Mhm.
acknowledge that that is part of it, and I'm sure at some point you can contribute your thoughts around that as well. And
Yeah.
we're about to open it up for chats now, but if you want to say anything to that, we can before we open it up.
Well, I, I think it goes back to the conversation we had earlier about it's typically the person who's searching who gets to educate everybody else. And
Yeah.
I think the same is true for adoptive family, particularly if it's the adoptee. Now, I've met a lot of adopted people along the way who said, I didn't tell my adopted family that I even was looking. And a lot of times I have one friend, I think she waited 8 years before she told her adoptive family that she'd actually been in relationship with her first family. So it's a very, very personal thing, but for me, in the spirit of authenticity, for wanting to get away from secrets and lies, I think it's important when we can, when it feels safe, when it feels like this is possible, to tell people and then to bring them along with you on the journey. Give them the books and say, hey, I want you to read this. I want you to, attend this class with me. I want you to listen to this podcast, and I want to help you understand what my experience has been. As we know, it's not always going to be well received. But I think when it's possible and safe to do it, that's helpful.
Yeah. In retrospect, I feel like I should have told my family first before I just did it and then told them about it after the fact. I think that might have helped a little bit. Let's open it up to questions now. Do we have anybody with their hands up? Oh, and by the way, Susan Harford says, I love the framework, Grace. Thank you to everyone here. This was excellent. So, okay.
Patricia, we normally at this time stop our
Oh,
recording.
I always forget that. Thank you so
That's
much.
okay. We stop it. So please join us again for happy hour, but we will continue with a Q&A.